This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. This week, as we're officially in spooky season, we're looking at the 2005 classic psychological horror shooter, F.E.A.R. This is the 10mm high velocity penetrator, military grade nail gun.
Of course it is. Very, very taken with the enormous projectiles that embed in the wall. Do we think there might be a bit of a 40k influence here, Dave?
40k influences everything. If there are any games or guns you'd like to see on the show, or if you have any questions for Jonathan or the Expert Reacts team, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode. Right, over to Jonathan.
I must remember that this is what, 2005, is it?
Yes, October 18th, 2005.
So we need to be kind and put this in context as, I guess, Half-Life 2 era. That said, this HK USP, which is definitely what this is, Universal Service Pistol, not unique selling point, is a bit jank, I have to say. Most notably, the slide. So if I can show you the back of the slide on this real USP 45, it's a solid lump of steel, as slides typically are. The one on this is, well, it's kind of weirdly reminiscent of some of the rare takes on a stamped sheet metal pistol, where the slide really is a thick sheet of steel, and then it's got blocks of steel in it or something to bulk it out. So that's a strange choice, especially as it's more work to make the slide look like that. It's almost like they only had profile reference shots and they just imagined what the slide would look like at the back. The trigger on the USP is double action. You can carry it in this state. Then when you fire the first shot, so that's double action, you're pulling the trigger, which means you're pulling the trigger, the hammer comes back, the hammer falls, gun goes off, the hammer is then left, cocked. So the hammer should stay back, in other words, after the player fires the first shot, but it doesn't, it stays put. Limitations of the era, I would say. Inclusion of the USP is very period correct, because it would be, because it was very much a current model when this game came out, and it just cropped up in all sorts of media. Very cool looking blocky pistol that wasn't a Glock, so it showed up in all sorts. But overall, it's you know, there's a lot of detail going on here for the period. I didn't play F.E.A.R. because I was too afraid. So I wasn't there to be impressed by this, but I would absolutely have been impressed, especially by the environmental destruction that's going on. Oh Lord. Oh, the USP was good. You have to reach for the emotional support weapon once more. One of my preferred ESWs, as I'm now going to abbreviate it. And I think what this is trying to be, which is an MP5A3 with this era of trigger group and the A3 sliding stock. It also has the what we used to call a lighted forend, with a flashlight or a torch in here with a pressure switch on the side. This was the height of cool circa 1998. Now this is a little bit more advanced in the sense that it has Picatinny rail on the upper there. The MP5 did kind of get that later on as a clamp on, but I think what's going on here, and I'm not sure what's going on here, but it looks like someone has, and I almost want to go and get one just to prove the point, but it looks like someone's got an MP7 and shoved it up the back of an MP5. The back half looks very MP7, or the back top half looks very MP7. The front end is disturbing to me, but it does not look right. And that revised handguard they put on there doesn't really make a great deal of sense, even if this was some parallel universe MP5. Like, how is it attached? Unclear. On the real MP5, it's attached very straightforwardly with a push pin through the barrel assembly here. This thing is just kind of on there with, I guess, no more nails or something of that nature. No rear sight on it either, so they put a rail on there, and I guess they're looking at the early backup iron sight situation, and they haven't put that on there. The rail is weird as well. It's a U-shaped channel with some very shallow looking stop grooves on there. Right, another early 2000s classic, well, 1990s to present, really, but certainly very much of the era of this game is the SPAS 12. Needless to say, hilariously over the top, and part of that long-standing trope of the video game shotgun, well, the movie shotgun as well. We see some pretty crazy effects from shotguns in movies as well. So they're pumping this, as I think we've covered before, is pretty standard. It's rare that the SPAS-12 is depicted in either semi-auto mode or as being switchable. It's not a bad effort graphics-wise. Here's one of ours. We have an oddly large number of these, about 5, I think, including a criminal recovered one, which has had the muzzle device just hacksawed off to make it shorter. I mentioned that because this one is also shorter than the real thing. Now, there's something going on with the stock there. For one, it's too thick. The arms are too thick, way too thick. These are sheet steel with a reinforcing oval rib. This should be way thinner than that. And the stock plate is, on this, hollow. A minor downside of this weapon in real life is with this stock folded over the top like this, giving it sort of its most iconic look, perhaps, is you can't aim it. There's no way to see past the stock mechanism to see the front sight. So they converted the stock to have an iron sight inside it, basically. Even though this game doesn't have usable iron sights. Now, would the stock still work like that? Not as it stands, because there is a spring in there in the butt plate as part of the mechanism. It should also really be moving a lot more whilst it's being fired, because it doesn't have the stock deployed. But I'm not going to hold that against this game. No other game was doing that at that time. But I guess developers take note, and animators especially take note. If you are depicting something being fired without the stock, the recoil impulse is very, very different. So get yourself some reference footage to represent that. Something I didn't notice at first, the SPAS-12 shotgun having a capacity of 12 is significantly more than it can have in real life. The tube sticking out the front there takes 8. So that's quite a very high capacity, not only for the real thing, but for a video game shotgun. Surprisingly high. Shotguns are normally high damage, low capacity. You know, when you reload, you can top them off. 12 rounds is significant. This is an interesting choice. Very HK heavy, this, isn't it? We've got 3. That's 3 so far. This is a sort of a hybrid of the G36 and its civilian semi-automatic derivative, the SL8. I say it's a hybrid because it doesn't have that sort of iconic grey finish of the SL8. Doesn't quite match it either, although I don't have an example in the collection to do a detailed comparison, but it's definitely not quite correct for that. Although it's arguably not very correct for the G36 either. Anyway, main reason I say it's a hybrid is that the G36 typically is select fire, unless it's a police carbine or something. And this is automatic, capable automatic fire only, I think. So it's sort of, I think they've gone with the SL8 look with the thumb hole stock and the slightly different configuration otherwise to make it look more sci-fi. Thumb hole stocks always make guns feel more science fiction. A better Picatinny rail on this compared to the not MP5 from earlier. Actually does look somewhat like one, although it has some slightly weird breaks in the pattern of grooves. I think the rear iron sight's too high for the front iron sight, but practically not really a problem since they don't function. Pretty close, although in detail not so much, but the overall impression is clearly the Tavor TAR-21 in this original full-length barrel configuration. They have kind of artistic licensed slash, well, they changed it up basically, like all the other guns in the game. Inspired by, I think, is a fair way to put it. Looking at the top, it looks like they may have seen this situation here, which is for a magnifier or other accessory, and they've just kind of gone, oh, that's too difficult, and interpreted it as some sort of switch. I'm not sure what that switch would do. In visual terms, it stops it being just a flat texture, and this would have been very complicated to represent, and they haven't been slavish to the design of the rest of the gun, so why would they do that? Notably, in terms of the use of the Tavor, we're missing this forward charging handle here. It's been sort of haloed into a very insubstantial little one over the pistol grip, which doesn't look very practical. That looks like it'd be hard to operate and would get bent if you clonked it. Oh, it definitely would get bent. Yeah, tiny little metal pin with a sort of what I think is meant to be a polymer cap on it. You can see if you look at the front end of the virtual not Tavor in this game, that just one example of how they've changed it up. This area here, which is a separate piece, replaceable piece on the bottom of the receiver. That has been somehow sort of scaled down into just being a sort of patch with these angled ribs on it. I guess the artists were told, base your guns on these. They've taken, I guess, photos as reference, but they've had the artistic license to turn them into kind of parallel universe versions of themselves. So it's hard to be too critical, really, except about that MP5, which is terrible.
So this is the 10mm high velocity penetrator, military grade nail gun.
Of course it is. Very, very taken with the enormous projectiles that embed in the wall. Do we think there might be a bit of a 40k influence here, Dave?
40k influences everything. So it's more Fallout railway rifle than anything, but I think that's just because it's pinning guys to the wall. Although, considering the timescale, could also be Half-Life crossbow.
I would guess that, yeah. That's very cool, though. All the physics going on there. Well, now we know this is a science fiction gun, if we didn't already, because it has a round counter on top, which is amusingly directly in the way of the iron sights, making them completely unusable and strictly cosmetic. Overall, it looks like one of the short-barreled semi-automatic shotguns that we've seen, and since this, actually, more so. Well, they might have been inspired by a very short Saiga or something. I don't know. I think they could well have come up with this on their own. There's nothing I can point to and say this is based on that gun. I'd say it's an original design, maybe with a bit of bolt gun influence and definitely some Half-Life, and I guess Quake nail gun influence. Like, how can we do a nail, railroad spike shooting gun with modern technology? And I think they did really well.
Yeah, how much are you reading Warhammer influence just because you're playing Space Marine 2 at the moment?
I don't know. I think already a short, chunky, blocky gun with a great big magazine on the bottom probably would have been enough for me to say Bolter. But yeah, probably that as well. Now, we like to think about the hypothetical practicalities on this series. I don't know why you would go with something like this. Assuming that the technical limitations were not a limitation, what's the advantage of this over either a bullet-firing weapon or a shot-firing weapon or a slug? This is more like a giant flechette. Flechettes have been tried many times over the years. Are actually used to some extent in small arms, but they're usually a cluster of little ones as a sort of substitute for lead shot or tungsten shot or whatever. This is a single solid round. I think there are issues with how well it would fly, because it has no kind of nothing there to allow it to spin or be otherwise stabilized. It's just a big heavy lump that would tend to swap ends pretty quickly, I think, coming out of the gun. And then there's the practical requirement side of it, of why would you want this? What is it giving you other than the cool factor of pinning bad guys to the wall? But for me, it's implied that if a nail gun is a weapon in a game, it's maybe been adapted from a tool type nail gun, because the real purpose for something like this would be for driving bolts or spikes into a hard surface or into the ground, or a rivet gun, something of that nature. I'm struggling to see how this could develop as a weapon. Well, that looks fun. It's the ultimate in pointless spinny bits. The entire front half of the gun revolves in opposition to itself. For some reason. Looks very cool. Can't imagine why you would want that. So in reality, this would be something like the Neo Pup 20mm somewhat compact cannon thing, but it's quite different to that. Although I don't know if they've had some inspiration from one of the real world side magazine 20mm cannons, but the front half is complete sci-fi. Again, we have a shot counter that's directly in the way of the sights, although there is only a front blade, no rear sight anyway. So that appears to be distorting reality itself as well with every impact. I mean, 20mm is a serious caliber, but it doesn't create Matrix style splashes. Okay, we're getting more and more science fiction here. Some sort of energy weapon with a funny little slidey thing on the top. Some sort of splash effect, I think. And the bodies go down with sort of some cool arcing energy on them. So it's like a sort of lethal long-distance taser type effect. But there's definitely that kind of Gauss gun feel to the initial blast.
That just turns people straight into skeletons.
Does it?
Yeah, if you see some of the first enemies you fight, you can see them getting shot and just immediately turning into a skeleton.
Oh, wow, it's a Mars Attacks gun. Wow. I have massively undersold this. I was staring at the gun and not the effect. That's really impressive. You think they're having to, in camera, as it were, replace the character model with the skeleton model and then have it ragdoll in the appropriate way. I'm sure that's not that difficult if you know what you're doing, but I haven't seen it before. I haven't seen people get skeletonized instantly by a gun. Youch.
Whenever I see a rocket launcher with bits that spin, I just think of Halo.
Yeah.
And with Combat Evolved coming out 4 years prior to this, there may have been some inspiration.
Did it?
Yeah, 2001 Combat Evolved came out.
Wow, I'm old. To be honest, when this came up on screen, my first thought was not rocket launcher. Very, very compact for a rocket launcher. Doesn't make a huge amount of sense as a rocket launcher either, because there's no exhaust. There's no means for the rocket exhaust to go that way to equalize the recoil and contain the pressure. It's more like just a very large caliber, more like a grenade launcher. It's like a rotary, it's like a cylinder-based grenade launcher, like an MGL or something, but a very different design. Looks a little fragile, actually, the way that the front and rear halves only seem to be held together by the carrying handle, although logically there'd be an axis pin through the middle of that cylinder, so probably overthinking that. I'd also expect a rocket launcher type weapon to sit higher in the FPS view than this does. This looks like it's being fired from the shoulder. Hence, for me, it feels more like a flat trajectory grenade launcher. Little weird how the rockets kind of appear out of nowhere as well. Like, especially if you're strafing, they kind of just appear in front of you. They don't come out of the front of the gun model. And honestly, if you were shooting a grenade launcher at this sort of range, you wouldn't really be worrying about the drop at all anyway. So functionally, this thing is more grenade launcher than rocket launcher for me. Thanks for watching, guys. We always appreciate it. If you like this, you might enjoy our Royal Armouries YouTube channel as well. Head over to that and check that out. If you check our website, you can find out about our any upcoming events, our 3 museum sites that you can visit here in the UK, have a look at our online collection and our various other social media channels. There is also the app History of Weapons and War, which it might be well worth you checking out if you like your weapons and your history. All right, guys, thanks a lot. We'll see you again next week.